I want to welcome to the program just an incredibly successful guy, incredibly successful governor, somebody we've wanted to have on here for a long time because he's one of the more thoughtful members of the Republican Party anywhere. But he's also had a great 2 terms as governor of Nebraska. Pete Ricketts, welcome to the program.
Well, hey, thank you very much, Josh. But man, don't play it up so much. Maybe you wrap up with that stuff at the end and people go, okay, I heard the conversation. It's probably like that. But man, to sell it like that up front, that's just setting me up for failure.
Well, I got to give you your due, right? I mean, you've got a lot of fans around here and you're getting more by the moment. Let me start with the news aspect of everything that you've been dealing with, because what we want is the journos to go away after the first 5 minutes so we can get the rest of this going and have some fun. Fair enough. So obviously, with the impending retirement of Ben Sasse, there has been a movement basically everywhere. It started in Nebraska, but now it seems omnipresent amongst senators, amongst basically anybody involved in the Republican Party, to try to encourage you to be a senator, essentially, right? And I saw that you put out a statement about how you were going to handle that. Maybe you can explain your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So obviously, we're still waiting to see what the timeline is from Ben Sasse. So Senator Sasse was down on Florida's campus this week. I believe he'll be interviewed in November for the job. And then, of course, it'll be up to the Board of Trustees to make a decision as to whether to offer him the job or not. But I'm quite confident they will, because he's the only candidate right now. So it seems pretty likely. And then it gets down to when is he taking the job and what's the timeline for his resignation. So what I said was that if I am interested in pursuing this job, I will not appoint myself. I will leave that to the next governor and go through the process of whatever that governor, who I expect to be Jim Pillen, that governor chooses to go through to decide who's going to be. But under state law, the governor has 45 days to select that next senator, and then that senator would run in a special election in 2024 and then be run again back on cycle in 2026. So there's a couple of elections coming up from whoever gets appointed for this position. And so we're just kind of waiting now to see what happens with the University of Florida and Senator Sasse and the timing, and then we can put together some more plans for how this might all work out. But it's just, again, until we know more, there's just not any point in speculating.
Yeah. Well, listen, if your successor has the wisdom of appointing you and you have the wherewithal to accept the responsibility, I know there's a line around the block of people around here and in Nebraska that would love you to do it. So I got to imagine you've had basically a hotline of your phone ringing off the hook.
There have been a few people who called me, yes.
All right, well, let's get on to the fun stuff. We can check the journos out. That's all we got for news. We're going to talk about fun stuff. Listen, I think your background is fascinating, right? And there's not a lot of people they know the Ricketts family, right? And they know of all of your success as a family. They know about your personal success. They know about your term as governor. They don't know a lot about sort of how you grew up and sort of what makes you you. I just kind of want to start with that.
Sure. Well, we grew up in Omaha, and, my mom and dad are originally from a small town about 50 minutes south of Omaha called Nebraska City. And actually, that's where I was born. My siblings were all born there as well. And I did live there when I was really young, but by the time I hit kindergarten, we were in Omaha, and that's where I, started grade school. And, my dad was the entrepreneur. My mom was actually a public school teacher till we kids came along. And, we grew up in a very middle-class neighborhood, middle-class kind of things, because a lot of the success in Ameritrade didn't really come until, frankly, I got out of college.
Yeah. So that's one of the things, and why I wanted to start with this is because nobody knows that, right? I mean, people who know you know that because they know kind of the way that you operate, and you have just sort of a never forget where you came from type mentality with that. But everybody sort of sees the success of the Ricketts family and sort of thinks that you grew up with a silver spoon. Not the case.
No, we grew up very middle class. There were plenty of times when mom would sell us on making pancakes for dinner on Friday night because that was inexpensive. There was always, sometimes we got a little short toward the end of the month when it came to meals like that. We didn't really go out to eat very often. And there were times when the chair actually held the door to the oven closed. They couldn't get that fixed right away. The dishwasher in our family was us kids because the dishwasher didn't work for a long time. So, but that, typical of a lot of families, right? You figure out how to make ends meet and you do without until you can get something fixed and that sort of thing. And especially when Dad was starting the company, I think I was probably like 12 years old or 13 years old at the time when he started the company. Dad would come home at night, we'd eat dinner, and then we'd go back down to the office. He would, Mom and Dad would take all of his kids down, and Mom and Dad would work like opening up accounts or something like that. And we would just like play down in the office and hang out there with our parents, which again, is a lot of families are like that, right? The kids get towed along and doing the family business. So
you got to learn to be pretty entrepreneurial with your playthings when you're dealing with like staplers and paper clips as toys, right?
Yeah. Well, they had these dumb terminals because it was a broker job. So these dumb CRT terminals. So we'd pretend like we were all cool playing on a computer or like flying a spaceship or something like that, but they didn't really do anything. You couldn't play actually any games. All the games were in your imagination because the screen was just blank.
Yeah, okay. That's classic. I mean, I have to imagine that early on then, that sort of teaches you a lot about what it takes to be successful, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that, you saw by example was hard work. I mean, that's my dad worked hard. My mom worked hard. So as, we get kids, my dad needed somebody down in the office. So my mom went to work with him. And so during the summers, we kids were kind of latchkey kids, but we were home by ourselves. In fact, we actually kind of preferred it that way. But we had chores assigned, right? So, doing the dishes, cleaning the house, making dinner, that kind of stuff would be stuff that as kids we were assigned to do. And then just, again, my dad always taught us about getting jobs. So like my brothers and I and my sister, we had a paper route. Like I think I got it in 6th or 7th grade, got a paper route. So to earn our own money. And in fact, I remember my dad taught me one lesson. We had the school carnival was coming up. This was before I had the paper route. And I just sold my football card collection to Danny Clemens for about $10.
Oh, man.
And we went to the carnival and my dad gave money to my siblings and then told me, you don't get any because you've got your own money. That's not fair. But good lesson to learn right away, right? So like earn your own money, save your own money, work hard, that kind of thing.
I bet Danny Clemens made out with a few good football cards out of that deal, huh?
Well, there was another story about Danny Clemens too. The Bill Buckner rookie card. I traded it for him. I traded for it. I got it. And then he realized he wanted it back. But we clearly called no trade backs. As is the standard protocol whenever you're doing trades, right?
And it's a blood oath in the elementary school. Absolutely.
Well, you would think. But Danny decided he wanted it back and like started calling our house and, and doing doorbell ditch it and stuff like that. No. And my mom finally made me give it back to him. Oh. So I was totally mad. Now, in a final twist of the story, on my 40th birthday, Danny framed the card and gave it back to me. No.
Well, at least he's got a sense of humor about it.
Right. It's like, thank you, Danny. I don't know that you ever acknowledged that we did call no trade backs, but there you go.
Yeah. An apology is in order, but I'll take the card back.
I'll take the card. So I still have that Bill Buckner card framed in my office.
That's a great story. I love that. Well, I mean, look, you had to have grown up with sports, right? I mean, it seems like you're super into, the football cards and baseball cards, but I mean, somewhere along the way, the family does buy the Chicago Cubs.
Yeah. So that was actually a dream of my brother, Tom. Tom, when he was in business. So first of all, take a step back. You're right. Yeah. We all grew up in sports, Little League baseball, Major League football, that kind of thing. And then, we went to Chicago. I went to school there, to the University of Chicago. I'm the oldest. My siblings all hero worship me, so they followed me there.
I'm sure they're going to be delighted to hear this.
Yeah, totally. They're going to love that. It's not the first time they've heard that line, though. Anyway, but Todd was kind of the black sheep. He went to Loyola University, up on the north side. Tom and Laura went to University of Chicago. But, back then, this is back in, I think I graduated college in '86. and the Cubs were starting to get good then. We went to the playoffs in '84.
Oh, that's the Sandberg Dawson era, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's when we started to become Cubs fans. And in fact, we actually had an apartment across the street from Wrigley Field on the corner of Addison and Sheffield. It's part of the Sports Corner bar now, but it was right across the street. So we'd wait out. This is back in the old, for all of your younger listeners, this is back in the old days when we didn't have this fancy thing called internet. We had go stand out in line on a February night and freeze your tail off while you waited for the ticket box office to open the next day. And then you got in line, you were in line and then you bought your tickets. So that's one of the things that we had to do back in the olden days. And then they eventually did kind of start catching up where you could do phone lines, but then it was always a crapshoot whether or not you get through.
Right.
So waiting out in line was actually more assured. But anyway, so
I watched a lot of Cub games in that era too, because I think it was the era before the lights were installed, right?
So right. It was. I remember the lights were installed. That was a big controversy.
Right. It was a big controversy, but I remember as a kid being a huge baseball fan as I was a Twins fan. I grew up in Minnesota, but during the day in the summer, there was only one game, right? Because the Cubs were the ones that played the home game. So WGN was like a fixture in my house watching baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how the Cubs really became America's team, because being on WGN, the superstation, they were broadcast all over the country. And, obviously, like I said, we had the advantage of living in Chicago and going to the games, and being in the bleachers. I bought, what I would do is buy 4 bleacher seats to every weekend home game. The first year I bought them, Josh, you know how much they were? $4.
Oh, geez.
$4. And then the next year, the Cubs were, like I said, they were starting to get popular. They doubled the price to $8.
Now they were pushing it at that point, right?
So it was still probably pretty good value. But anyway, so we grew up as kind of Cubs fans, and then the opportunity came up with the success that my dad had at Ameritrade to be able to buy the Cubs. And Tom, when he was in business school, wrote a paper how he wanted to be like the general manager for the Cubs.
Uh-huh.
And so this was Tom's idea. He actually reached out. This is when I was running for Senate in 2006. He reached out and said, hey, the Cubs are going to be sold, or the Tribune Company is going to be sold to a private equity firm. They won't keep the Cubs as part of this. They'll spin that out because it makes no sense to have a baseball team within a media company like it is. So we should buy it. And I'm like, dude, I love the idea, but I have no time to help you. I'm running for Senate. So go ahead, crazy man.
You do your thing.
Go do your Don Quixote thing, tilt at windmills. But Tom did a great job of putting together the team. He got the best advisors from the investment banking side, from the legal side. And when the Cubs announced in April of 2007 that they were for sale, Tom was Johnny on the spot there with our team. And of course, the whole process took, like I said, he started it really in the fall of 2006, bringing the rest of the family on. In fact, the way he convinced my dad is they were at one of the rooftops overlooking Wrigley Field. And Tom said to Dad, look at this. And Dad's like, yeah, it's beautiful. He's like, no, Dad, they sell 3 million tickets every year. And Dad goes, you mean this is a business?
There you go.
And Tom's like, yes, it's a business.
Got the old man's attention with that.
That's how he got the old man's attention. That's exactly right. So, and I loved it from the idea of like, this could be a family business that, people would want to be involved in. Like you could buy a widget factory and maybe somebody be interested. You could put the money into a properly diversified portfolio and you guarantee nobody would care.
Right.
But if you bought the Cubs, you probably have something a lot of members of the family for generations would want to be a part of, or at least be interested in. And so it's just kind of a way to keep the family together, because, I love the feel from Ameritrade when we were a family business. And my mom used to like bake birthday cakes for everybody in the office on their birthdays. And we got too big for that. So we just had a birthday, one day a month we'd have, donuts and stuff like that for everybody's birthday. But, I had that family feel even as we got bigger.
That's cool. I didn't even realize that. So, you guys basically did everything as a family at that point. I mean, that's significant, right?
Yeah. We're a very tight family, very close family.
Yeah.
And so I like the idea from keeping it along those lines. And like I said, it took us till October of 2009 to actually get the whole deal pulled together. It was like the longest sale in history. But my brother Tom did a fantastic job, much better than I would have. I would have lost patience way earlier than Tom did. And he got it. He just had the persistence and got it all pulled together. And we were ultimately ended up being the successful, bidder after a lot of ups and downs. Things like Blagojevich trying to sell off the U.S. Senate seat there. And how that impacted us is the guy who was negotiating for the Tribune Company got wrapped up into the FBI depositions on that.
Oh.
So that was just one of the things that you wouldn't expect necessarily to come up when you're trying to buy a baseball team, but it does.
It teaches you a little bit something about ethics and government too while you're at it, right?
Yeah.
Incredible. Well, I mean, look, the end of the story of that is you guys win World Series. I mean, you did the impossible and brought the Chicago Cubs a World Series after so many decades and decades of misery.
Well, and that's the thing, right? There was no curse. The curse was bad management. And I don't know about the Wrigleys because that was, the Wrigley sold to the Tribune Company in 1981 for $20 million, if you can believe it. I'm like, whoa, wish I had that deal. Wow. But what I can tell you with the Tribune Company, the reason they didn't win is because the Tribune Company didn't care about winning. And it turns out winning is actually hard. Like even when you're trying, it's hard. Mm-hmm. And so as a public company, like Jim Henry, our previous general manager, would say, I would never know if I had the money to actually sign my draft picks.
Yeah.
Well, how can you operate a business if like I draft all these, I can draft some great players, but I don't know if I'll have the money next quarter to actually sign them.
Oh, geez.
That's no way to run an operation.
That's a rough hand.
And so really it was just applying basic business practices to how do you run a business effective? Like, I don't know, crazy stuff like putting in measurements and metrics, holding people accountable, demanding excellence, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like one of the things when we hired Theo Epstein was Theo got all the scouts and the coaches together to do a 3-day session. Never happened before, at least not in living memory, where the scouts and the coaches been together, which is kind of crazy, right? They all work in the same team.
Yeah.
And in 3 days, he put together this book called The Cubs Way. It was a manual for everything, how we did, detailed down to like if you're running down first base line and you're running through the bag, you hit it with your left foot. If you're rounding the bag, you're hitting with your right foot on the inside corner. It cuts 7 steps off to second base.
Oh, man, that's amazing.
I'm giving you a ballpark kind of stuff.
Yeah.
At the end of 3 days, you said, okay, this is our manual. This is how we coach. This is how we scout. And the implication being, if you don't want to do this, you've been a part of creating this, but if you don't want to do it, you should go to another organization.
Find somewhere else.
And part of it was a lot of the stuff you want to do on scouting, like every prospect had to be filmed. A bunch of the scouts didn't want to do that, so they left.
Oh, that's
incredible. We brought in other people who did want to do that work and wanted to be held accountable because they wanted to be good. And that ultimately, that's how we changed the culture, just applying basic business practices, running it like a business to be successful. And, we had to get world-class facilities if we wanted our team to be world-class. That's why we changed our venue down in spring training and why we invested so much money in Wrigley Field. So it really is a lot of stuff that any successful business would probably do, just hadn't been done at the Cubs. Mm-hmm. And that's what allowed us to really turn it around and get that World Series.
Well, gosh, did you ever? And I was saying last night when I watched Rizzo go deep for the Yankees, the guys that you put together on that squad, I mean, holy smokes, I can't believe that Schwarber and Rizzo, you had Bryant. I mean, everyone on the same team at the same time. I mean, that was a whale of a ball club.
Yeah, it really was a good ball club. But it also just gets back to what I said earlier. Turns out winning's hard.
It's
right?
hard.
I mean, I don't know, Josh, did you watch that World Series with Cleveland?
Sure did, yeah.
Yeah, it was a really close run thing, right?
Yeah.
And then and of course the media was all talking about, because they were such a talented team, everybody's talking about, dynasty. But again, you see that, even with pretty much the same talent the next year,
things change.
Yeah. It's just hard to keep that level of consistency. The difference between the really good Major League Baseball teams is razor thin.
Yeah.
And so
and everybody adapts to you, right? I mean, you win a World Series, they're going to play you differently than they did the year before. No question.
Yeah. And then if you go back and just another thing, go look at our injuries.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
World Series year, we had remarkably few injuries.
Mm-hmm.
Not as true if you look down some of those other years afterwards.
Yeah. God, listen, Whale, I could talk to you for another hour about the Cubs. I just love it. I love everything about it. But I do want to get to your run here as governor of Nebraska, because it is, one of the more appreciated and undertold success stories across this country. The management that you've had over 2 terms of the state, just incredible. What are some lessons learned here based upon, I'm sure you applied a bunch of business principles to how you ultimately ran the state, but boy, it sure has worked out.
Yeah, and it's just like what we do with the Cubs. Tom came in and said, "Hey, we're going to set a goal." With the Cubs, Tom said, "Hey, our goals: bring a world championship to Chicago, fix up Wrigley Field, be a good neighbor." 3 things that he always preached, right? Well, when I came into governor's office, we had to kind of do the same thing that we did with the Cubs, only for state government, which is start applying those business practices you were talking about to how we run our operations better. We should be operationally excellent. When you think about it, the big picture, take it to the 50,000 foot level. The argument between Republicans and Democrats is what is the proper size and scope of government?
Yeah.
Right. Democrats want government to do a lot more. Republicans want to do a lot less. Broad strokes, right? But there are things we agree government should do. Mm-hmm. And for those things we agree government should do, we should do them really, really well. Like operational excellence should be our buzzword, right? We should really be driving to provide great services and do that in a way that reduces your costs. And that's totally doable, right? Private sector companies do it all the time. And while we're not a for-profit business in government, we can apply the same things. And I got to tell you, like when I walked into the governor's office after I got elected and before I got sworn in, I went to the chief of staff at the time and I said, "Hey, can I have the job description for everybody who reports to the governor?" And his response back, and he was only kind of half kidding, was, "Well, we don't have." First of all, he said, "We don't have any." I'm like, "You don't have any job descriptions?" He's like, "No." I'm like, "Well, how do you do annual reviews?" And this is the part where he was kidding. He's like, kind of. He said, "Well, we review people daily. When they step out of line, we yell at them." But it was pretty much the way they operated. So we had to put basic stuff in, like job descriptions, coming up with measurements for everybody. Like people didn't have any measurements for how to do their job. People think that you can't fire civil servants. It's not true. Yeah. You can't fire anybody if you're not measuring how they do their job.
Yeah.
How do you know what to tell them what to do if you don't have goals for them to achieve, and either they're achieving them or they're not? And if they're not achieving them, you help coach them to get better, right? Or if it's not a fit, then obviously you coach them out of the organization.
Yeah, I mean, what you measure improves, right? And any lot in life, what you measure improves because you got a measuring stick about whether you're either hitting the goal or you're not.
Yeah, exactly right. So you got to have some, and people, again, high performers, people who are good, want to be measured. Yeah. They want to know they're doing a good job, right?
Yeah.
And so that's part of just the step of, if you want to have excellence, you've got to drive that, and it starts with just like measuring what people are doing and holding them accountable for getting it done. And frankly, we had to, start developing our people. That hadn't really been done. Yeah. Training managers to manage. We do a leadership academy now to really help develop our talent at the state of Nebraska. Just again, a lot of the stuff that you would expect a business to do. We've implemented Lean Six Sigma, which is a process improvement methodology. Now we've done over 900 projects, saved over 900,000 hours of our teammates' times, $100 million in hard savings, and it's really allowed us to drive performance. Now, I'll give you just one quick example of how it can impact somebody's lives. So when you've got a child with special needs, whether it's physical or behavioral, you often have to travel to get specialist help, right? And most of these families, they're not wealthy families. So they need to get reimbursed for their hotel room and mileage and stuff like that. Well, on average, it was taking us 16 days to reimburse somebody for their expenses. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, it's outside of a 2-week pay period, right? That's 14 days. So now you're putting a financial strain on these families who had to pay out of pocket, and now they're waiting past a pay period to get reimbursed.
Yeah, they're carrying the balance.
Exactly right. And these families can't afford it. So what we did is we did a process improvement. We cut it down from like 89 steps to 62 steps. But more importantly, we took the time down from 16 days to 3 days.
Now, there you go.
Now we're within the 2-week, your pay period. So you're not burdening these families with, how do I get past, wait till my government reimbursement shows up so I can actually, pay my heat or, utility bill.
It's just, you think, listening to you talk about it, you'd think that some of this stuff is self-evident, but it's just not done, right? I mean, government is so bureaucratic. We see with the Biden administration, all of the new hoops and hurdles that they're giving individuals and businesses, not to mention inflation and everything else. I mean, that's got to frustrate you to no end.
Yeah. Because again, and I can tell you, it's been a journey for us at the state of Nebraska. You just don't turn this stuff on and it works right away. It's changing a culture, and that takes years in the private sector even.
Yeah.
I cannot even imagine how hard it would be at the federal level, but it has to happen.
It does.
We simply have to have a federal government that functions, that works well. Again, we can argue the big picture policy stuff between Republicans and Democrats, but man, there's a lot of stuff we agree government should do, and it should do it well, and all too often it fails.
Yeah. Well, listen, the country could use more governance the way that you've laid it out. There's no question about that. I want to get to our 3 questions because I think, let's look at, I'm sort of fascinated in the answers of this with you. The first one, and I'm serving up a Nebraska guy this kind of question. So I kind of think which way we're headed, but just to make it a formality, if you could plan your last meal on earth, what would it be?
Well, I know you're expecting me to say something about a nice juicy steak.
That's where
like
I thought
a tomahawk ribeye done rare, Pittsburgh. So that's kind of the easy one. But frankly, if it was really my last meal, we have this pizza place in Nebraska, in Omaha, called Zio's. My wife and I go there about every weekend and have been for as long as I could. Well, I started going there ever since I moved back from Chicago to Omaha. So that's been 30 odd years. I've been there about every weekend. And since my wife and I started dating, we've been married 25 years now. We go about every weekend.
That's so good.
So that's kind of, it's pizza by the slice, New York style. So that would probably be my last meal because that's kind of my comfort food, right? So that's probably where I'm going to go.
Yeah, if you're counting your last minutes, you're probably going to want to be as comfortable as possible. I get it. And you can have a couple extra slices because you're going to slide in sideways anyway. I love it. All right. So question number 2, if you never got into public service, never got into politics, and you had this sort of blue sky in the middle of your life that you could plan anything, literally anything that you wanted to do with, and you just fill it in, what do you think it would be?
Well, I never had the eyesight to be able to do this, but I think being a Navy fighter pilot would be the coolest thing ever. Like you're talking about like elite athlete from a physical. I mean, you just saw the Maverick movie, right?
Totally. Yeah.
So, yeah. Right. So I mean, like great, even better than the first one, frankly. Totally. But like, it's a physical job. You have to be smart. I mean, you have to, I mean, it's detail. I mean, it's just like, this is probably got to be one of the toughest jobs on the planet.
Yep.
Yeah. And then to land on that carrier, I've actually had the chance to watch some of these nighttime landings. Those people are brave because that boat goes up, and even a carrier goes up and down in the water. Yeah. And you got to time it and land it on there and catch that arrestor hook. Those folks, I mean, every time they land, they're courting danger. It is like, those are the people I just admire the most. And maybe like a second right behind them would be Navy SEALs, just because of the great work they do for us as well. But I never, like I said, my eyes have always been bad, so I've never really had that.
It wasn't an option.
Do that. Yeah, it wasn't really much of an option for me to be able to try and do that. The physical aspect would have been probably a challenge as well too. But
I got to imagine if you were flying a fighter pilot, though, you'd have the Top Gun soundtrack going at all times, right? I mean, that's just part of the criteria.
Oh yeah, I'd be playing all that 80s music because that's the best music decade ever.
If Kenny Loggins isn't in your ears when you're flying a pilot, I know you're doing it wrong.
Absolutely.
All right. So the final question is, our view is that every successful person is generally motivated by one of 2 things: the thrill of victory or the agony of defeat. It's not that anybody enjoys losing, right? Or anybody gets any less benefit out of winning. It's what motivates you, right? And the agony of defeat people are people whose every success that they've ever had in life lasts about 5 minutes. Right. But any defeat or setback that they've ever had, they sort of carry around like a backpack, vowing never have that happen. They work that much harder to make sure it never happens. The thrill of victory people are generally optimistic, glass half full, always charging up the hill to the next thing, regardless of the outcome. Governor Ricketts, where do you find yourself on this?
Well, Josh, you pretty much laid it out. So there's only one right answer to this.
I don't know. We're about 50-50. You'd be surprised.
Really? Okay. Well, first of all, I would say for me, what motivates me is trying to discern, what am I supposed to do? God has got a purpose for everybody on this planet. We all have our unique skills, the talents we bring to the table, and we're supposed to figure out, what does God want us to do to be able to help carry out his will on earth? So I think that for me is my biggest motivator. When you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, you can do really, really hard things and they get to be easy. So I would say, if you're going to like just force me into, okay, which one it is, it's about winning, because I like to win. I like to be successful because I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. It's going to help somebody else. It's going to benefit somebody else. And so I want to make sure I'm successful because I'm probably doing it for somebody else. Mm-hmm. Like running government. Well, I shared with the story about how we help families, just in that one small example. We do that all over the place in state government. We have so many opportunities to help people. So that's what really gets me up in the morning. I love being successful. I love winning. And here's another thing I learned after losing my Senate race back in 2006. You can fail in very big public ways, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Sun still comes up the next morning. Your kids are still your kids, and they still love you. Your friends are still your friends. My wife still loved me. Like the world didn't end because I lost that Senate race back in 2006. And once you understand that, to be successful in life, you have to take risks. They're called risks for a reason, because sometimes things go bad, right? Yeah. And so whatever you were trying is not successful. You take a chance and it fails. But if you never take a chance, you're never going to push the envelope. You're never going to climb the mountain. Unless you're risking failure, you're never really succeeding.
Yeah.
And then as I was thinking about this too, also, I just love, and I can't quote it to you, and you probably don't want me to, but that Theodore Roosevelt quote, "The man in the arena."
Yeah.
I love that, because it's like, even if you fail, at least you failed knowing that you didn't just go blah, right? It was like, I failed trying hard. And yes, it's terrible. It really sucks losing and it sucks failing. But it's better to feel something than to not feel anything at all. To never try.
Yeah. Well, it's really well said, Governor. I think we all get a pretty good handle on why it is that you've been successful at just about everything you've done over time. Listen, I hope, and I think all of our listeners hope, that your public service continues well into the future, because it's been a model of how conservative governance can work and should work well into the future. So thanks for what you're doing. Is there a website or something people can follow along what you're up to?
Yeah, we're at GovRicketts, or we're on Facebook and Instagram. I'm sure there probably still is a PeteRicketts.com website out there, but I'm not promising that's been updated in about 4 years. So yeah, this day job as governor kind of keeps us kind of busy. So
somebody's probably looking into that right about now.
Actually, that'll be my next call.
I love it. Listen, Governor Ricketts, thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Thanks a lot, Josh. You have a good one.